The story that I went to about the everyone at work but and there was a bunch of people that had watched it. I think it just depends on what they do. Well, I was
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Strand. I'm a math teacher here at Mosby High School. Thank you all for attending tonight. We hope that you were able to get out into the cafeteria and enjoy that nice hot meal provided from Casa Mezcal. If you didn't get a chance to do that this evening, please make sure you get out there and enjoy some of that food tonight. Also, in case you missed it, there is a wonderful gift basket out on the front table outside the auditorium, so please make sure that you get out there and drop your name in that basket as part of tonight's raffle. We'll be doing that later this evening, so be ready. Also, you probably want to pick up one of the folders from that front table if you haven't. On the left-hand side are notes from our presenter tonight, including his presentation. On the right-hand side includes a feedback form for us, as well as a few other resources put together from our school's mental health teams. This evening is number 3 in a series of mental health community nights that Mosby has offered. Our goal tonight is to help create some partnerships as we support youth in our surrounding areas. We also want families to learn more about great resources that we have to offer within Marathon County. So, without further ado, thank you very much to Brian Weiland from the Behavioral Health Clinic for your willingness to be here tonight. You are an expert in your field, and we appreciate you coming here and offering all of your services and knowledge with us this evening regarding ADHD in both children and adolescents. So, thanks again for your support, and ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Brian Weiland.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so I thought that maybe I'd walk down here. Hopefully that's a little bit better. I feel like if I'm up here, I should be singing and dancing or giving some kind of a performance for you. So we'll stay down here. So as we just said, my name is Brian Weiland, Dr. Brian Weiland. I'm a clinical psychologist here in town, and I'm actually from the area. Brady and I actually were just talking. There he is over there, the IT guy. We actually played soccer together way back in the day at BW Marathon County. We were on the college soccer team over there, so that's kind of cool to see him again. So, but yeah, I grew up in Merrill here, and I got some degrees from Wisconsin here. And so my graduate degree is from the Wisconsin School of Professional Psychology, and we had a focus in testing. So we especially looked at testing. We also had a focus in therapy. Right now I work at the Behavioral Health Clinic. I'm like I said, a psychologist over there, also a co-owner. There's 4 of us that own the Behavioral Health Clinic. We have 2 locations, one in Wausau, one in Plover. And we have a lot of clinicians that work for us. There's 5 of us clinical psychologists and a number of other licensed clinical or licensed professional counselors. And we contract with school social workers and school psychologists and things like that. So what we're talking about for today is ADHD. And here's the agenda, and I believe everybody has some slides to this. So what we're hoping to talk about a little bit today, I think starting off the conversation about stigma would probably be a good idea. Talk a little bit about what that is, and just I think it kind of helps give some context to mental health disorders. So a conversation about that, and then we'll go right into ADHD. We'll talk about how the name of it has changed over the years. Where does it come from? We'll talk about ADHD in the brain. So I am not a neuropsychologist. I know enough about the brain to be able to explain and talk about this, but I want to make it really, really simplified for folks in this room because I think that understanding how the brain works a little bit is important to just understanding ADHD in general. And talk a little bit about treatment and what else we could do, maybe at home and things like that. So, and then at the end, we'll have some questions. So maybe, so typically I'm used to more of a kind of back and forth in terms of a format. So, but I think maybe they want me to just kind of present until the end. So if you have any questions and things like that that sort of come up in your mind as we're having our talk today, write it down or something like that. We'll make sure we spend some time at the end trying to answer those. So here's what I mean about that back and forth. So maybe we'll start it off like this. And you can just shout it out if you want to raise your hand, that's cool too. What words, phrases, things like that come to mind when you hear the term mental disorder? What kinds of things come to mind? Frustrating, excellent. Another?
Depression.
Depression, wonderful. Pharmaceuticals. Another one? Yeah. Autism, excellent. Illness, okay. Therapy, wonderful. Behavior, okay. So what's neat about what I heard here is that they were all mostly about, they were all words associated with mental health issues. What sometimes I hear, in talking about mental health stuff is words like violence, or weakness, or crazy, things like that. I think that those are words that are more associated maybe negatively with mental health, and that's what I think what we're talking about when we're talking about stigma. It's sort of like, initially, when you think about mental health issues, when you think about mental disorders, what do you think about? And it seems like most of the people in this room, you either thought of a particular mental disorder, or you thought of different terms that might be associated with that, but I didn't hear anything negative, necessarily. When we think about stigma, we think about kind of where this comes from. Now, in our society, in American culture, we really value things like our independence, right? I mean, how important it is when for all the parents in the room here, if you see, your little one walk for the first time, it's a big deal. That's a big deal, and we love that because they're walking, and hey, they're one step, no pun intended, one step closer to walking by themselves, doing things by themselves. What about when they get a job? It's kind of a cool thing, all right? We appreciate that, we value that. So in our society, we value people who can do it themselves, handle their own. They're independent. And so some of us, if we're struggling with a mental health issue, we may need help. We may need help from our friends, may need help from our family, we may need help from community professionals in order to work through that. And so in our minds, I think automatically we're sort of programmed to view that as something's wrong with you. There's maybe a defect here, or you must be kind of weak in mind if you can't manage some of this depression stuff on your own. And so a lot of that, again, comes from where we are as a society. But the truth of the matter is that mental health issues, mental disorders, are indiscriminate. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how much power you have. It doesn't matter how much intelligence you have. There's been members of the royal family, for example, who've come out with their own battles with mental health issues, and they have anything, and everything they want in life is theirs. It's not about what you have or who you know. It's simply about the brain, potentially about some environmental influences as well. So we have to be careful with this piece of things, because if we start to label people or what's going on in their lives as defective or weakness, we sometimes our children, especially with ADHD, can sometimes have this feeling of that they're the problem. They must be the problem because there's something wrong with them. Or the parents might think, I must be the problem. Okay, if my kid's going through something or whatever else, it must be a parental issue, and you hear this all the time. Granted, there are some situations, absolutely 100%, parents are pretty influential, right? Parents are pretty influential, so they can have some negative effects on children, absolutely. But to say that that's the sole cause for some things would be missing the full picture. Okay, so some cool stats here. So again, what we're talking about tonight is ADHD. Most common mental health disorders in children. Top of the list. Almost 10%. So that means, out of 10 children, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. And then there's some other related issues here, behavioral conduct issues, some anxiety stuff. I know that you guys talked about that last week. Depression, I know you guys are talking about that, or excuse me, maybe last month. Depression, you guys are going to be talking about it in the next community night. Autism spectrum disorder, Tourette syndrome, things like that. Okay, so let's focus and let's hone in here on ADHD. So as you've noticed, I've been using the term ADHD. And some folks are in here probably like, why does he keep saying ADHD and he's not saying ADD? Okay, so here's the evolution of the term. And you can see there used to be, back in 1987, right in the middle there, ADHD was the term that we used for the kiddo or person who was all over the place. He was the hyperactive individual. So that's, you know, in a room like this, that would be the 7-year-old who's underneath the chair, or just can't sit down. He's, you know, kind of all over the place. It used to be ADHD, and then ADD was the term for the individual who was kind of spacey, forget things all the time. You know, you're kind of like having to kind of snap your finger when you're talking to them so that they can hear you or see you, staring out the window, stuff like that. So used to be a difference between ADHD and ADD. And interestingly, a lot of mental health professionals or physicians still use the term ADD. And it's fine, I mean, we know what they mean. But just as an FYI, for folks in this room, if you really want to impress your friends, we know that it's called ADHD these days. So back in 1994, it changed. So the general term is ADHD, but then there are 3 subtypes of it. There's the inattentive type, so that's the kiddo who's staring out the window, forgets things all the time, pretty spacey. There's the hyperactive / impulsive type, that's the kiddo who's underneath the pew. And then there's a person who's got a little bit of both. So, you know, has a little bit of fidgetiness, restlessness on top of their aloofness or spaciness and things like that. In 2013, we came out with a new DSM. The DSM is, by the way, the kind of the mental health Bible, right? This big old thick thing. It's got all the mental disorders in there, listed in there, along with all the criteria that go into making these disorders. So in 2013, we got a new edition, and it hasn't changed. It's the same. Okay, so where does it come from? So it's what's called a neurodevelopmental condition. Okay, that is a mouthful. Basically, it just means there's something going on with your brain. So it has to do with the neurology of your brain. It's very genetic. So usually one of my first questions for assessing, you know, kids with ADHD is, how's the parent doing? Ever been diagnosed yourself with ADHD? How was school for you growing up? Very genetic. Diagnosed over 2 times more in boys than in girls. And there are external factors that can increase the risk for this. They've been linked to different things like this during pregnancy and stuff like that. And it's highly what's called comorbid with other conditions. So basically that means that ADHD usually goes along with other things. So I know again last time you guys talked about anxiety. Pretty common for ADHD and anxiety to exist together. Also ADHD and depression. Because if you think about it, here's a kid we have who, you know, no fault of their own, can't seem to, again, sit still or can't seem to remember their assignments, misplaces things, turns things in. They begin to not really like school that much. That's just how it goes. That's a typical trajectory for kiddos with ADHD. They know when they get in there, the teacher's going to call them out on something that they forgot to turn in, or you know you're going to be talking or something like that. They're going to get yelled at or whatever. And so kiddos with like that, who they're constantly kind of met with that at their school, where they are for many hours during the day, and then they go home and the parents are frustrated and things like that. They begin to think, you know, geez, the world's always yelling at me. I'm always doing something wrong. And you can see then where things like anxiety and depression sort of build from that. So it's very common for ADHD to be one of a couple, at least another mental health issue. Okay, so real basic here. So here's the brain, right? The brain develops from the back to the front. So when you're an infant, you need the stuff in the back of your head. See, way down at the bottom there, that kind of, it's not actually not labeled, but it's kind of at the bottom there. You need that when you are born. That's things like regulating your body temperature. That's like respiration and breathing. You need that stuff. Like when you're born, you need that stuff. As you develop and as you age, then your brain develops more and more into the front. In the front, we have what's called the frontal lobe. And that is, everybody, that's what makes you human. This is what separates us from any other species in the animal kingdom. So we have these big old frontal lobes, humans do. And this means that we can do things like plan for our future. We can organize our day. You know, dogs are not thinking, oh, I wonder how many puppies I'm going to have someday, or you know, or contemplating life or who their best friend is. They're not thinking about those kinds of. They're like, who's that? What's that smell? Where's my food? You know, it's like all about this moment because they got these tiny, tiny little frontal lobes. By the way, fun fact to impress your friends: cats have smaller frontal lobes than dogs. So, for all the dog lovers in the group here. So again, humans have these big frontal lobes, so that means we can do these things. So the theory is, and so here's the best sketch that we have so far with all of the science that we have, is if we look at on the right then, so the front of the brain is actually up. Okay, so the front of the brain is up. So the theory here is that if we were to have instruments that could be really, really sensitive, and they would look at an ADHD individual's brain, they would notice that the front of the brain, where all that stuff is contained, that I just talked about, is a little bit darker. It's a little bit dimmer. It's not as activated. There's less going on up there. Remember, that's the part that makes you human. That's the part that you need to stay focused, to organize, to plan ahead, all that stuff. So we would see a little bit less activity there. So here's just, you know, kind of another breakdown of what I was just describing. The fancy-dancy term for what the frontal lobe does is called executive functioning. So if you think of like an executive of a business, right? They're the ones who are way up in the top of the skyscraper calling the shots, right? Like, where's the business going? What's the mission statement? How do we plan for the future and all that stuff? They're not the ones, you know, I don't know, they're not ordering the toilet paper and stuff like that. They're the ones that are way up there calling the shots. So, that's executive function. It's a good way to remember that. That's what the front of your brain is supposed to be doing. So you can think of like this worker, this executive worker in the front of your brain that's supposed to be working, that's supposed to be doing all this stuff. But with ADHD, maybe think about that executive being kind of drowsy. You know, kind of nodding off at the desk. You know, people need him or her to be doing stuff, and they're kind of just, you know, they're missing stuff. That's what we see with ADHD. So, in charge of planning, organizing, reasoning, controlling impulses and emotions, and empathy. So this is really important. So the term attention deficit is kind of misleading, and I suspect that'll change. That word will absolutely change in a number of years because it's not just attention. It's much more than that. When we think about things like emotional control, that too is contained in the front parts of our brain. Other parts too, but absolutely in the front parts of our brain, which is why a lot of kiddos with ADHD, they do have a hard time, you know, with emotion. There can be more meltdowns sometimes, things like that, and things like empathy, so their ability to relate to one another. Oftentimes they're not aware that they're bothering everybody in the classroom when they're talking out of turn, or they're throwing things, or they're doing this and that. They're not aware of that. It's hard for them to put themselves in other people's shoes at times. So, raise your hand if you've seen this picture before or heard of this story. Anybody? Oh, nice. Awesome. All right, we got some folks. Okay, this is Phineas Gage. Okay, so he worked on railroads. And he was actually a pretty important person. His job was to, see that thing in his left hand there? That's a rod. And what he would do was they would put these charges, because they had to, you know, plow through hills and things like that, and they used explosives. His job was to take this tampering rod and it would place charges in the hills, and then he would go in there and tamper these charges way deep into the holes like that, so that when they blew up, they did what they needed to do. That was his job, and that apparently was a pretty like you needed to know what you were doing in order to be that person. One day he's out there doing his thing, and he threw the tampering rod in there, and an explosion went off, and blasted this tampering rod through his head, through the frontal lobe, just through the frontal lobe portion, and he lived. And this is like back in the day. So they get him up off the ground and stuff like that, and he had that thing go right through his head there, and he lived. But here's the interesting thing: he was never the same. His personality was different. He became very abrasive. He used to be very respected in the community. This was a big deal. He became very abrasive and very brash. He interestingly ended up joining the circus, and just things changed in his life. Became very impulsive, didn't really care. His filter was kind of gone, and again, because of the damage to the frontal lobe. So an interesting case study, and so Phineas Gage. So it's kind of an interesting case that really, again, with localized injury to the front part of your brain, what that can do, and this is exactly what we're talking about here. So, how do we assess for ADHD? So, there are, it's more than, it takes a little bit, okay? So there are different things that we can do. So what we do is we get a really good history of the individual, because it's absolutely important to sit down with folks and talk to them about what they've noticed in their lives, because they have to meet specific criteria. It can't just be a kiddo who's spacey from time to time, or in the last several months, all of a sudden this person is forgetting everything and can't seem to hold it together. ADHD is a lifelong issue. They should have demonstrated all of these symptoms for their whole life. And so when I get an adult sitting in front of me and they're talking about how they're having some struggles with this sort of thing, we have to go back to their childhood. We have to talk about, how were things for you growing up? How was school for you? Was it easy? Was it not easy? So we talk about those different things. So usually pretty classic with ADHD is, and there are absolutely exceptions, but here's the classic look. If we're looking at children, it is a person who is an underachiever. You know they're bright. You know they can do it, but they don't do it. An underachiever. And they kind of go through life that way. They move on to the next thing, and they just, they kind of get involved in something, but then they back out. They just can't follow things through, and may kind of bounce around at different things, just a little bit without direction. This is kind of the classic look. But for kiddos, we always want to try to get lots of different people telling us what's going on with this kid. So we talk to the parent. And the parent's like, yeah, little Susie, she's quite a terror at home. I mean, she leaves a wake of a mess behind her, and I'm telling her to do stuff, she doesn't do it, or she's forgetting stuff. She's not sure where she placed her homework assignments and this and that. Okay, then I talk to the teacher, and the teacher's like, yeah, she's sitting in school, and I'm always, kind of having to walk by her in the desk and say something to her, that I can get her attention. She's actually the kiddo that has to sit in the front. I had to adjust her seating, just because, she has a hard time paying attention. And then, talk to the child. The child's like, yeah, and everybody's always telling me, that I'm not paying attention and stuff like that. So because for the diagnosis of ADHD, it has to exist among multiple settings. If the kiddo is a real terror at home, but they're great in school, all right, now we're like, okay, what's going on at home? What do the relationships look like at home? Now this is starting to look like something else. Or vice versa. The kiddos does fine at home, but then they get to the school setting and they're all over the place or something like that. That's a little different. ADHD has to exist from childhood and among settings. So it has to be, and it has to be to a significant degree. So this is an important point here. It's because it's not just little Susie who you know, she's just like every other 6-year-old who can't hold it together. No, it is the 6-year-old that's on everybody's mind. It's different. It's the person who, this attentional issue, this focus issue, this executive function issue is affecting their ability to make friends. Nobody really wants to hang out with little Susie because she's always kind of, you know, I don't know, she's just disruptive. She's getting everybody in trouble. You know, she's talking to kids and they're like, oh, I can't talk to you, the teacher's talking right now, and everybody, you know, so eventually people just kind of don't want to sit by her anymore. Or, you know, it's the person whose grades are affected, they're turning in things late, and then at home they're always getting into arguments, you know, with mom and dad because, you know, I asked you to do this, it's the 3rd time I asked you to do this, I don't understand why it's not getting done. It's like, yeah, I remember, okay, I'll do it. It is to a significant degree that it is affecting their lives. It's not just every once in a while, you know, they're having an issue. Okay, so co-occurring, so different issues that can co-occur with ADHD, as I mentioned to you, it's very comorbid, right? So it can exist with other things too. So 64% of kiddos with ADHD also have something else going on, a diagnosable mental health issue. Most of the time it's a behavioral or conduct issue. And you can see how this would develop. They're missing everything the teacher's saying. You know, they're 10 years old and they just can't, you know, they put their head down for a second, or they tune out for 5 minutes and they come back and they have no idea what the teacher's talking about. By that time, the classroom gets pretty dang boring. I don't know what's going on. And so, I don't know what the teacher's saying. I'm sitting over here and there's 30 people in the class. I'm not just going to sit here for 30 minutes and then they're going to start bothering people. And so they're going to start to have some kind of related issues, or they're going to try to switch it up for themselves, kind of entertain themselves. So now all of a sudden, you know, little Tommy is starting to make funny noises in the back of the classroom. You know, he's tapping his pencil super loud. He's kicking the girl in front of him. He's not interested in what's going on in front. And he starts bothering people. So a lot of times you see these conduct-related issues. Anxiety is kind of an interesting one too. And again, remember I said before that a lot of times you're kind of getting yelled at, you're kind of getting corrected. I mean, you know, you go to school, you go home, and if you're anybody who, you know, any adult in here who's worked at a job where you got, you know, 5 bosses, that's a pretty stressful thing. Everybody just kind of comes over, and everybody, you know, if you do something wrong, you got all these people kind of telling you you did something wrong. You know, it's a pretty anxious situation to be a part of. And depression, you can see how that, again, as I said before, how that can sort of evolve and develop. Autism is kind of an interesting one, again, how that is a bit correlated. 14% of the time, and Tourette syndrome. In your handouts here, you actually have this sheet. This is one of the coolest sheets I've ever seen before. Basically, it has a whole mess of symptoms on the left-hand side, and then across the top, it has these columns of different disorders, and it shows how the overlap here, the overlap in symptoms. So, you know, if you pick out one, you'll see that the little X is in multiple boxes. The little X for poor problem solving is in fetal alcohol syndrome. That's also a part of autism. It's also part of bipolar disorder. It's also part of depression, things like that. And honestly, I think that whoever made this was probably a little bit conservative in that, you know, for example, I would say, you know, definitely ADHD, we're going to have some poor problem-solving abilities there. So it's really kind of an interesting thing. So this tells you how complicated it can be to make these kinds of diagnoses. And that's why we really want to try to get a really great assessment, talk to multiple people about how the kiddo is doing before we just make a diagnosis. ADHD is controversial enough, whether or not it exists or not. There's like these 2 parties as to whether or not it exists. And then its treatment is also controversial because a lot of times a go-to treatment approach is medication. You know, if we think about giving children medication, that gets pretty dang controversial. And so it's really, really important that you're absolutely certain that this is something that's going on if a parent is going to make the decision to have their child take some medication. Or have their child attend therapy or coaching, you know, ADHD coaching for a while, which can be expensive. I also just put in there the pediatric symptom checklist, which is just a generic checklist here that has a lot of different symptoms on it and can kind of get to the, can kind of help us tease out some things. There's symptoms of depression in there and anxiety, symptoms of autism spectrum in there and ADHD and things like that. So it's kind of a neat little thing that sometimes we can use. I'll tell you though, let me just rewind for a second. I'll tell you, for our assessment batteries at the Behavioral Health Clinic, what we do is we give a what's called a cognitive test. So we test their, we give an IQ test, basically. We look at their verbal ability, we look at their nonverbal ability, we look at their working memory, we look at their, how quickly they can process information, we look at that. So we look at their cognitive ability, and then we also, have them do a really, really boring task. And a lot of times this will pull out some qualities that we can write up in the report. And then we also do an executive functioning screener, a test. We give them, we give their parent. We also give psychological measures to the teacher. In fact, I know that there's been, I think Mary Zimmerman is sick today, but I know she's helped me out with cases within Mosinee School. Her and I have communicated back and forth about different things, and getting the school's perspective, getting the parent's perspective, and getting the child's perspective, and then we give a more comprehensive psychological measure to the child to really, again, pull out whether they have some anxiety or depression or other things like that. So it's pretty comprehensive. We try to stay in good communication with the primary care doc too, because if they've been working with their pediatrician for a while, they might know a lot about what's going on here. Okay, so the good news is, so this is about treatment. What do we do? So the good news is that, as I said before, remember the brain develops from the back to the front. So your child, 7 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 16, 17 years old, will naturally get better at these things because their brain is not done developing yet. It doesn't finish developing until 21 to 25 years old is when the frontal lobe is really kind of getting rounded out. So that's good. That's good. That means that your 6-year-old who you're really worried about right now, things are going to look different. You don't see many 26-year-olds underneath the pew at a theater. Things get figured out. Maybe some of you do. I don't know who your friends are or whatever, but. Okay, so but then it really comes down to this model, like how do we help the sleepy business executive? How do we help that business executive who's up there and they're falling asleep on the job? We need them awake. So what do we do? 2 things. Either we get them an assistant. They need somebody to help them, to pop in there, wake them up, to do some things for them because they're not able to do this stuff. Or maybe we'll give them coffee, something. Sure, caffeine, yeah, exactly. Something to wake them up, absolutely. So let's look at the assistant idea. So the assistant idea is basically they need something or somebody to do things for them, okay? So remember that their brain is having a hard time with planning and thinking ahead and just thinking about the consequences, organizing stuff and empathy and stuff like that. So let's give them some systems, let's give them some structures to do this for them. Things like checklists, timers, binders, folders, sticky notes, warnings, all of those kinds of things. So what I found is very helpful this day and age, it's kind of cool is if kid is like, I don't know, 10 to 16 or whatever, and if they have a phone or something like that, they're having trouble remembering that they got to take their medicine, for example, every morning or something like that. It's like, hey Siri, remind me to take my medication tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. The next morning, Siri reminds them, right? Siri on your Apple phone. Or, okay Google, remind me to do this or that on your Android phone. For adults, the adults of us who struggle with remembering things like anniversaries and stuff like that, or say, your significant other has something really important happening on Thursday night, and typically you just don't remember that stuff. Hey Siri, remind me, Thursday night, 5 o'clock, send a text to my wife, good luck on that exam, whatever. That's an example of an assistance or a system that we can put in place. If you walk inside the house, Adolescent is always losing their keys or always losing their wallets, misplacing their student ID and stuff like that. It's got to go one place. Find one place where it goes. When you walk in the house, there's a bowl. It goes right there. It has to go there. If it's not there, you're in trouble. It goes right there. Your book bag, it goes right here on this mat. It doesn't go anywhere. I'm not walking around with my book bag in the house. Not anymore. It goes right there, and the ID goes there. And so that way, when you're on your way out the door, you're walking out the, it's like, all right, there's my ID, there's my book bag. And that's an example of a system that we put in place to kind of help with this. Again, lists, carrying around a notepad, we can type your notes in your phone, all those kinds of things. So that's an example of the different systems that we can do here. Other important things too. Make sure you capture their attention before we communicate with them. Okay, so that's it's an important thing, and some are better at this than other people. But one of the things I recommend sometimes to teachers, if again little Susie's kind of back there, and she's always kind of looking out the window and getting sidetracked by the cool school buses that are going by outside or something like that. We develop a non-punitive gesture from the teacher to the child that only they know about. And the teacher walks back there, taps on Susie's desk, gives a secret little jingle on their desk or something like that, which is a reminder to, hey, I need you here, you need to pay attention to this. Or something in the front of the class, something like that, that is just a signal between her and Susie, again, to sort of, pay attention as to what's going on. And yeah, develop predictable systems like routines, kind of mentioned that. Okay, what about the coffee idea? So the coffee idea is AKA medication. 90% of folks who are diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder find benefit with medication. And there's two different approaches. Two different classes of medication. It's usually all stimulant medication. And so this is an interesting thing. It's like, why would you okay, so Tommy's all over the place. He's under the pew, he's doing this and that. Why would you give Tommy a stimulant medication? I mean, isn't he gonna get like all, he's gonna turn into a squirrel and it's gonna be like really nuts? No, you give him a stimulant because the stimulant is meant to stimulate the front part of the brain. Remember we said that was falling asleep? It's dimmer. So we give that to wake up the front part of the brain, and now all of a sudden little Tommy's like, oh geez, he's thinking twice, before he stands up and moves around. It's a little bit different. Now the front part, the executive's like, oh, okay, we got stuff to do here, and the productivity can kick into place and things like that. If it's not effective, if it hasn't been working, the medication hasn't been working, usually it's because of a dosage issue, or it's because we're in the wrong. We're trying, these are the two major classes. There's amphetamines and then there's methylphenidate. Amphetamine is like Adderall, methylphenidate is like Ritalin. And usually it's because we have a dosage wrong or it's because we're choosing the wrong molecule. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I know that this is, it's going to be a controversial thing. At the behavioral health clinic, we absolutely don't push medications. Really, it's about trying to meet the child where they're at and set up some behavioral interventions first. Sometimes this is pretty important, though. There are some other things that we can do that can help with our success. Be careful with your biases. Make sure that you're not labeling children as troubled students or a troubled child or something like that, because that sets up that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Number one thing we can do as a parent is reward them for appropriate behavior. Hey, I asked you one time to do that, and you did it right away. High five, dude. You did it right away. Nice work. I mean, and then it's, okay, all right. And what's neat about that too is it doesn't make your whole, as parents, suddenly with a kid with ADHD, your whole relationship can be about correcting and prompting and discipline. And I mean, that's a bummer. Everything's always negative and stuff like that. So and sometimes we got to. Sometimes you just got to do it. We gotta come down on kiddos sometimes. But the most effective way is the rewards. Last thing I just want to touch on here, just to kind of give a little bit of a model for this is this little box here. The ideal place that we want to do when we're parenting our children in general, especially kiddos with ADHD, is we want to be in the top left box. So that is high warmth, high structure. So if we think about it, if we move over to the top right box, for example, that's low warmth, high structure. See how that works? Low warmth, high structure. So this is the authoritarian parent. Military-esque. Don't hug me. You stand there, kind of a thing. Low warmth, but high structure. And then bottom left, low structure, high warmth. So this is more passive style, permissive parent. I really don't want to talk to my child about that because I know that they'll get upset. That sort of mentality. I mean, you know, so that is a low structure, you know, or they just don't have any rules at home. You know, no real structure. But they're certainly excellent at giving hugs, embracing, showing the kid that they're loved and cared about. There's value in that, but it's not balanced. Low warmth, low structure is an absent parent. That's pretty understandable. So we want to be in the high warmth, high structure. So think about that when you're applying an intervention to your child. When you're looking to do discipline or something like that, how can I do this in a way that I'm also being warm and caring, but I'm applying a structure? You know, and sometimes it's just a matter of taking the tone out of it, taking the attitude out of it. You know, there's a way to say, take out that dang garbage. It's the third time there's a way to say that. And Timmy, it's the third time I asked you, buddy, can you please take out that garbage, man? I don't want to ask that again. That feels a lot different than the first one. So that's a general rule, kind of how we want to go about that. All right. So, there's a lot of information. Talked about a lot of things across the board. And so I'm wondering kind of where this is sitting with folks in the room and what kinds of questions we have that are kind of, again, kind of in your minds. Anybody have anything that we want to make sure that we can get to and talk about? Sorry. Go ahead, yeah.
What would you consider like the correct age to like try to distinguish the difference between just like childhood behavior and really like assessing a child?
Awesome question. Yeah. So the question was, what age is this starting? How do you? At what age should we begin assessing for this? That you can actually get a good read on if the child is experiencing something like ADHD, or if they're, just normal childhood behavior. Usually, they got to be in school for a couple years. So we, every once in a while we see a kiddo who comes to us and, they're diagnosed with something at like 4 or something like that. I mean, really, in my mind, that's pretty dang early. Because again, the criteria is that we need it to exist across settings. And so if we're thinking, how do I know, so it's got to be affecting their time at home, it's got to be affecting probably school, it's got to be affecting, their social stuff. And at 4 years old, okay, they're kind of all over the place anyway. So after a couple years in school, 6, 7, something like that, now we can get a little bit more data. And teachers, they see hundreds and hundreds of kids, especially if they've been in the field for a while. And they should be able to give you great feedback, like, hey, there's something a little different about Tom, just let you know. Most of the kids go through this okay and don't have a problem with this or that, but Tommy seems to have a problem with those things. And so just put it on your radar. And then we might consider, kind of going through more formal assessments. So usually it's kind of around that age. 6 is probably the youngest. What else? Great question. Way in the back. Yes, sir.
In your profession, are you seeing any adverse side effects from the prescription of methamphetamine to children?
That's a great question. So if you're asking me specifically, so it sounds like you are, I would say that there are absolutely side effects with every medication.
Into adulthood, I guess.
So later on in adulthood?
Yes, after they are finished with the regimen.
Like prefrontal cortex development?
Yeah. It's a great question. I would say that there haven't been any studies about that, sort of the long-term effects of some of those things that, if we've been giving our children, for example, if they were on a very consistent regimen of a medication that later on that means that they're going to have some sort of breakdown in their brain or something like that. So not typically. Usually what happens is they develop some sort of a kind of tolerance to the medication, and later on in life they need to either switch or they need to throughout their lives stop and start medication. But again, me personally, I have never had a patient who's come in and said something like, I wonder if my problems today are because of the prescriptions that I was prescribed when I was younger. I know that it's a quick Google search away. You Google something like that, and there are plenty of anecdotal pieces where people have things to say about that. Absolutely. And so I would never say that that's something that cannot happen. But I would say that there's no research on it.
How long, like, you had a patient who was prescribed for this, and then, like, within 10 years,
Yeah. I mean, within the past couple decades, for sure. So this is definitely something that we've been prescribing for a while. So I bet you, I can maybe predict where your mind's going. Is maybe we don't have that data available to us at this point, and that's great. That's a great idea. All what we have is sort of the studies that exist right now, but yeah, it's a good question. I think that's a good argument for lots of different things related to what you're putting in your body. Plenty of foods, for example, that we are learning about now that we've always eaten that are not the best thing for us. Different diet changes and things like that people have to make. So yeah, absolutely. Great. Oh yeah, that's that. And so many of the things that you mentioned there. So every little bit matters. Every little bit matters. There is no great research at this time that shows that something like a diet change will have dramatic effects. Like for example, even if you cut out all sugar, there's been studies on this. Even if you take out all sugar out of a child's diet, it won't do what we're hoping for. With a kiddo with ADHD, it won't do what we're hoping for. But every little piece matters. You're not going to give Tommy, pancakes with the syrup and the this and the that in the morning when they're trying to go take a test, an hour later or something like that. And then the exercise, absolutely. We know that, sometimes with kiddos who have trouble sleeping at the end of the day, or if they, in general, they're pretty energized, we know that we got to get them outside, we got to get them doing things, we got to get them running around. That's a good thing. We know that they're more regulated when they get that activity in. So it's all different angles. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The vitamins and things like the sleep and the screen time. You're so right. That our eyes are looking at this bright light at 9 p.m. When we think it's supposed to be dark out. I mean, boy, that's kind of messing with our circadian rhythm. Absolutely. So there are lots of things that we're doing that certainly can affect these different symptoms. But I'll say that. Right in the discussion, in the evaluation, we make sure that we're touching on those pieces. What does this child's typical day look like? To make sure that there aren't these confounding variables like this, because those are all really important parts of the equation. Yes?
So, if you're a child that's been diagnosed with ADHD and one of the symptoms like anxiety,
Yep.
what if your child's also diagnosed with odds, like they're odds with fire?
Yep.
Okay, then is giving your child medication going to do anything for them then?
If they're just diagnosed with ODD?
ADHD and
Oh.
is the medication really actually doing anything, or they're still able to everything make that choice that because of the defiance that we don't want to do this, we don't want to do that, and they're not going to do it?
Right.
Is the medication actually doing anything for them?
Well, theoretically, so the question was, what about something in ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, and ADHD? Because of oppositional defiant disorder, a lot of times these children, they're choosing to be difficult. And sometimes kiddos with ODD can also be diagnosed with ADHD. And I guess just got done saying that ADHD, there's not their choice. And so how do you distinguish the difference? So it's very important. So theoretically, if a child has been diagnosed with both ADHD and ODD, if they truly have ADHD, the medication should be effective because the medication is supposed to do the thing to the front of the brain, and ADHD is a problem at the front of the brain. So if that's truly a diagnosis, then it should help with things like, to some degree, impulsivity, all these other things, empathy, planning ahead, and all that kind of stuff. If it doesn't, if it's not helping with that, then, you know, either they fit into, remember I said 90% it's helpful with, so either they're 10% of the population who medication is just not going to be helpful, or maybe we should check our diagnosis.
Do you think that kids could become immune to the medications once they've been out for so long?
Yeah, so that was...
This medication has been changed, like, so many times, and dosages.
Yeah.
And it just seems like every single one, no matter how high up they go, after so long, okay, new medication, new dosage.
Yep.
So
How old is your son?
where do you go from there?
How old is your son? 13. Yeah. So it's unusual for a child that age to develop a tolerance at that age. So I would say that, you know, all of our systems are quite a bit different. Either, you know, some of us, you know this on your own. You know, some of us, if you take something, you know, for something, you might just get plowed, and it might just hit you so hard. And others of us, you take 2 or 3 of the whatever it is, and it's not affecting you at all. It's amazing how everybody's brain chemistry is a little bit different. So your son, a couple things, may have a particular brain chemistry where he already, you know, his brain, it doesn't respond to those kinds of things. And there are names for that, you know, medication. I don't think it's medication intolerant, but something like that, where it's just like your brain, it fights hard. It wants to stay where it's at, and anything that comes in there to try to mess with it, you know, it kind of butts up against that. So that's a possibility. If the dosage, they're messing with the dosage, they're messing with the molecules, and it's not doing what they need to do, it's kind of like, man, again, I'm wondering about diagnosis. I would look again at that and be like, all right, well, are we just, maybe we need to change the way we're looking at this. We're kind of taking it from this angle. You know, it's like, you know, the kid's got a broken arm, and here we are focused on the leg, and we're moving the leg around, like, how come this leg isn't doing this or that? Oh, that's not the issue. The issue is the arm. If they're in pain, it's the arm, not the leg. So I would say that, you know, maybe it's a matter of changing our view on that. But again, you might be one of those kiddos who's just, you know, his brain fights hard. Frustrating situation, I imagine. Yeah. Excellent question. So unfortunately, in central Wisconsin, we have a shortage of psychiatrists. And so oftentimes our primary care doctors, they are the ones prescribing. But interestingly, our pediatricians, our family docs have gotten pretty good at that. They are decent at understanding mental health. It's certainly not like a psychiatrist, and we wish we had more of those, but they've been thrown into this position where the psychiatrists are unavailable, and so they've had to take extra courses and learn more about these, prescribing these kinds of medications. I would say that if you take your child to a pediatrician and they say, it looks like ADHD, let's give meds, I would say that's the wrong approach. But I think you'd be hard pressed to find that kind of approach. Most of the docs in this area will say, it looks like ADHD, let's give them an eval. Let's take your kid over to the behavioral health clinic and let's get them set up for an eval, come back, give us the results and see what it looks like. So usually my experience is that docs have been actually pretty good about making sure they're not stepping outside of their competency and they're trying to be responsible. Because especially now, because the stimulant medication, it's a controlled substance, and so they have to make sure they check a lot of boxes before they start prescribing this, and so they're on the hot seat too if that kind of thing passes through and it shouldn't have been. I see people coming up here, so one more question. Yep, sure.
How often should a child be checked for the ADHD?
Yep.
A child that they just have prescribing and other tests and it doesn't have anymore?
Yeah. So interesting thing. So again, theoretically on paper, ADHD should exist throughout your lifetime. Theoretically, that's as much as we know about ADHD right now, because it's a neurological issue. It's not, it doesn't have to do with the environment. You can change the environment, but that's still, your brain's still going to work that way. That's the thought. But you're absolutely right that again, as we age, things can change for us. And let's say you're in school and it's really it's hard, and so you were diagnosed with ADHD when you were in school, but now you have a job. That doesn't require you to remember things. It doesn't require you to, pay attention to detail a whole lot. Now all of a sudden it's going to look like you don't have ADHD. And so if somebody was diagnosed at like 7 or 8, and then they want to get accommodation, school accommodation or college accommodations at 18, 19 years old, their college will usually require it to be retested. So yeah, I would say, you shouldn't let, I don't know if play organizations really let more than 5 years go by, if they're going to be giving kids accommodations and things like that. They want to make sure it really exists, especially since our understanding of ADHD, it changes over the years too. Does that answer your question? Kind of, sort of? You definitely look like I did not answer the question. I'm going to be over here so we can talk more about it maybe after. All right, cool. Thanks everybody, appreciate it.